to another episode of the F Word, and today we are joined by Amber Cowburn Armoogum, and we're going to be talking about wellbeing, specifically workplace wellbeing and festive wellbeing. So Amber, I've got your job titles here and I'm going to read them out because there's a few. So you are the Global Head of Wellbeing at the British Council, founder and director of Working Well South West, and founding trustee of the Invictus Trust. Wow, what a roll call, what a lineup.
Thank you.
So starting at the beginning, talk us through your journey and how those roles have come about.
Yeah, I mean, my whole journey into having a career in mental health and well-being it doesn't start from the most positive story. Sadly, within my family, my brother suffered with a very short period of intensive mental ill health, and this was back in 2010 when there was just not a lot of knowledge, there was not a lot of awareness, and there was certainly a lot of stigma around youth mental health. And we always said at the time he wasn't maybe the person that you would expect. He was this super successful, outgoing fashion student. He had a lot going for him, and this poor mental health period was so intensive. And sadly, we lost him just before Christmas in 2010. And he'd taken his own life, and it was such a devastating shock to our whole family, to our whole community, to everyone who knew him. And it just catalyzed this whole journey where my family decided to set up a mental health charity in Cornwall. So Invictus Trust was born, and I was only 16, 17 years old, but all of a sudden, I was so aware that we needed increased awareness. And then, as we got into campaigning, we actually needed better services. And it kind of shaped my whole career. I then went off to university and found at university there was a whole nother set of problems for students there. And I was at a high performing university where they wanted people to perform, but they weren't looking after people, and people were dropping off, really, really struggling away from home, all of those pressures of university. So I set up a student mental health organization there. And then when I left university, I came home and worked in Cornwall for a year running the charity, and we had a really intensive year where we campaigned for a mental health unit to be opened in Cornwall. Because actually that came about that, we Ben had to go in, my brother had to go into an adult unit because he'd just turned 18.
Okay.
But what became really clear was, and as we did campaigning, we met people, was had he been under 18, there was no mental health unit in Cornwall at all. So we had young people from Cornwall all across the country in mental health units, essentially renting the beds. The council were renting them. And so we did a whole campaign around bring back our children, bring them home, because we had parents, traveling to Manchester, to Edinburgh, to Bristol to visit their child who was in hospital.
Can't imagine that.
Yeah, it adds a huge amount of financial and emotional strain to something that's already incredibly hard. And these young people thought they'd done something wrong because they'd been sent away. So that kind of shaped my career from there. I then went and worked for a mental health charity nationally. And then I worked in a university running their mental health strategy. I went independent a few years ago, actually just as the pandemic struck, which was an interesting time to become an independent trainer and consultant in the mental health space, and particularly thinking about workplace wellbeing. But it was actually a really formative time because, everybody was working from home, or a lot of people were, obviously not service industry and healthcare. And I was doing lots of support, lots of strategy, lots of workshops, lots of working from home policies, how to do that well. And now, as you said, I work for the British Council as the Global Head of Wellbeing, whilst also keeping up some work through Working Well as well.
It's from a really kind of emotive, sad story, but what you've achieved out of that and the things that you've done, I'm sure that Ben would be extremely proud of what you've achieved. And in those roles, which one's the hardest? Which one's the most difficult?
I would say that everything I do presents different challenges, and you see it from a slightly different way. Obviously, when we do work for Invictus, it's emotional. We care a lot about it. It's about Cornwall. It's about young people. It's about services, and you do come across young people who are really at the acute end. They're really struggling. They're really in crisis, and we're trying to do everything we can to help get them better care, better services, and advocate for them. So that's always difficult. It's always so close to our hearts, and my family do incredible work in that space. So I have to my parents really drive that, and they have done for so many years, and they took their grief and really turned it into something which I just think is so incredible. It's something you hope would never need to be done, but those voices do need to be heard, and they've done an incredible job kind of amplifying that. I'd say now, though, in the work wellbeing space, I used to joke that when I worked at a university, I oversaw student mental health and well-being, in a kind of strategic way, and then staff were added to my brief, and we had 32,000 students, and we had
Wow.
4,000 staff, but the staff took up a lot more of my time. um, so that was my kind of baptism into work well-being.
Yeah.
And every company you work with, every organization, it's different. There's different challenges, there's different pressures, but those themes remain the same. And I think now at the British Council, the challenges are definitely how global it is. We've got colleagues in really, volatile places. They're dealing with extraordinary circumstances. There's, big concerns about safety, and those things are, foundational to well-being. But you can feel very helpless when you're trying to support people in places that are, have very, very difficult conditions. So
Yeah.
that's a new challenge, definitely.
Yeah, and it's an ever evolving landscape, as you said
Yeah,
back in 2010 when you kind of first entered this arena and started to understand what services there were, or
yeah,
one, as the case may have it, is actually in that sort of say nearly 15 years, how much it's evolved and
definitely.
how much actually now well-being is part of the everyday language, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. The amount that people talk about it now, and like the awareness piece has definitely come on so, so far. I do sometimes, I've said in talks before that I think there is a gap between awareness and action. There's a lot of talk, and sometimes that can be even worse in a way, because we talk about something, we point to it, we say it's so important, and then there's this gap of like, so now what? What are we doing about that? And I do feel that with young people today. When I work in the kind of youth mental health space, it's like we've come on leaps and bounds in terms of young people talk about their well-being a lot more. They talk about their mental health. You're right, like it's in their language. It's common. It's all throughout social media, but they're still seeing that gap of not having the action, not having the services, not having the skills or the strategies. That we talk about it a lot more, but actually, in terms of the services, sadly, like that improvement's been much slower to come through. Um,
Yeah, so it's almost like they're saying, look, we're aware of, we're more self-aware
yeah,
and aware of our friends and our family, but where do we take that next?
yeah, yeah, definitely.
And I guess it's as well, the work that you're doing with the younger generation is workplaces will start to see their benefit as those individuals come through into their working life, into their careers, and they have roles within teams or leading teams or creating their own organizations, and actually those core values around positive well-being, hopefully then will just be the norm within
Yeah,
businesses.
I think this is what I think you've absolutely kind of hit the nail on the head there, because when you look at young people, they are the future of work. They are who are going to be in your companies, leading your companies, and I think it's going to be a really transformational time. Like, I think there's going to be such a shift. We're seeing it already, like with Gen Z coming through the workplace. We're starting to see that demand on kind of, I need this organization to care about me. I need this organization to do a little bit better than that. I'm not going to just work, work, work and burn myself out. That's not what my life is for, and I think that there is a real generational shift there. I think we have to be realistic around, like, workplaces are never going to be a day at the fun fair. Like, that's not why you're there. You are paid to do a job. There will be everyone's got parts of their jobs that they don't enjoy, or that are boring or mundane, like that's life. That's why you're being paid. But I do think the way that the younger generation are kind of demanding that
Mhm.
better work, kind of place and relationship with work, and doing it themselves, like you said, that kind of self-ownership piece of, I want my relationship with work to be healthy, therefore I won't do X, Y, and Z. I think it's going to be a really interesting time, but as always with a kind of culture shift, I think, to start with, it can be quite uncomfortable because you get very different viewpoints, the old and the new. And I'm just intrigued to see where that ends up. I also think because the younger generation are much more willing to change jobs and change careers, that they don't see it as one job and one career for life. They think, where will I go next? Maybe I'll do something completely different in that decade, or maybe I'll go there. Or I think it gives this kind of interesting change. Whereas in the past, people would have been looking for like, where's my career for life? And something really bad would have had to happen to go, yeah, do you know what? I don't want to work here anymore.
Yeah, and it is that's feeding on from the kind of evolution of the workplace is around that, and people having more choices and more
Yeah.
other things that are important to them outside of, okay, what's the next job title or the next salary bracket? It's actually, where can I work for a company that makes a wider social difference, or where can I work
Definitely.
somewhere where I feel truly valued and have a really brilliant, I hate the term sort of work-life balance, because I
Yeah.
think they should go again
Yeah.
alongside each
It's
other.
more of a blend.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, where people can kind of balance both of those things. And I completely kind of resonate what you say about younger workforce and younger generation. So at Wyfield, as you know, wellbeing's kind of a real
Yeah.
focus for us. And I'm the oldest person in the firm. Oh, God. I know I've just said that now out loud.
She's put it on record.
Yeah, at 38.
That's
So
incredible, though, isn't
our
it?
team is a young team, and
Yeah.
that isn't what we set out to do. I
No.
just think because of the workplace that we have and the culture that we have, and things that we want to do here, we are attracting those younger
Hmm.
generation of people,
Hmm.
of adults, into careers
Definitely.
where
They see the values,
those
they
things are
see those
important.
values and go, that chimes with me. That aligns with who I want to be. That's the kind of workplace I want to be in. That's,
Yeah.
I think that attraction piece is really interesting as well, because now you've got kind of the big corporates looking at well-being in a different way, thinking, about the future, and particularly around, talent attraction and talent retention. Like, will you get the best people in the future? And actually, I think particularly the big corporates, they've always just relied on, we're the big
Yeah,
corporates.
their
Everybody's
name.
going to want
Yeah.
us, regardless. And actually, I don't think that will be the way. They'll have to be constantly showing, we are aligned with these values. This is our culture. And this is how we keep reinforcing that. It's not just one thing where you go, tick, well-being, culture,
Absolutely.
social responsibility, done. And that doesn't play out day to day. People are looking for that meaningful, you know, values of a workplace, and what that culture is. And you do spend a lot of time working. So, having a workplace that makes, contributes to your well-being in the sense that it's the right environment for you, and you're not constantly pushing against that, that is really, really important. Because whilst I said, it's not a day at the fun fair, at the same time, it can't be detrimental to your well-being, because you're going to spend a lot of time there doing that,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the point that I wanted you to talk to some of our kind of people that are listening today, is around where businesses can place themselves in this. It's a bit of a minefield if businesses aren't already thinking about this. And actually, going back to what you just said, is it's not necessarily about all the fun stuff. It's about having somewhere that's safe for people to work, and they feel mentally and physically safe
Yeah.
in their work environment. And
Yeah.
actually, when you say it like that, that feels much less of a challenge to provide to people.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's really easy to see best practice or really great case studies of examples of what people are doing, and think, actually, okay, I've got a small business, or even a medium-sized business, and I don't think I can implement that sort of thing within
Yeah.
my organization. So if I can't do what everyone's raving about, then I won't do anything. But actually,
Sure.
it's more than that, isn't it? It is creating that safe space.
Definitely. And I think you're so right there, in the sense that it can feel so overwhelming. You only have to go on LinkedIn or Google it, or look for something, and you're just inundated with all these solutions, platforms, things you should be doing, things you should be paying for, initiatives you should be running, and all these very shiny, flashy things. And actually, like you said, the foundations of workplace well-being are around trust and safety. Do you feel like you belong? Do you feel like you're included? Those really foundational things, they're not as glamorous, they're not as exciting. But I always say it's like a cake, right? Like, the things on the top are like the sprinkles and the frosting, and they look great to start with, and they're all your initiatives, and they're all the shiny things. But actually, if you haven't got the ingredients in the cake right, like, nobody's going to want to eat that, and that frosting is going to become very sickly if there's no follow through, right? Like, you need the cake.
Yeah.
It's not as exciting, but you need the
Yeah.
sponge. And I genuinely say this to businesses, in the sense of, like, we're attracted to, let's do those initiatives, let's look like we're doing well-being. Actually, some of the best companies I've come across as a consultant or a trainer, who are actually really looking after their employees, really demonstrating it, and you see it in their loyalty, their retention, how, satisfied, and I don't like the word happy when it comes to workplace well-being, but their employees are, happy, satisfied, content, being challenged, being supported in those right environments for them. But often the companies I've seen doing that really well, they're not the ones with all the shiny things at the front. They're just doing it really authentically and really well. And I think you're so right there about safety and trust. Those things have to be in place. And I think sometimes people who have never felt unsafe in a workplace or never felt unfairly treated, they don't fully recognize that, because actually the workplace has been set up for them, and it's making sure that everybody around the table feels included, welcomed, safe, and that you have real trust in an organization that things will be done with integrity, things will be done with process. Those things are really key to well-being, and it's like we can't be doing the shiny things if those things aren't in place. And the nice to have things, the initiatives and the events, I actually think there's a real move away from that, where people are saying, well-being is not free pizza or free fruit in the staff room or a yoga class on a Thursday. Like, it's not that. They're lovely things, but without the kind of base work, like, they
Yeah.
just start to look very, very shallow very quickly.
Yeah. And they're good. I think they're good talking points or
Yeah,
good enablers to pulling you away from the day to day or away from the screen. So actually,
definitely.
if in your culture there isn't an openness to communicate
Hmm.
or open up and talk about your feelings, then
Yeah,
sometimes those events and things can help break down some
definitely.
barriers and start to kind
Hmm.
of bring the conversation to the top,
Yeah.
which is important. But yeah, as you say, they're not a sticking plaster. You can't
No.
just put a yoga event on and
Yeah.
in fact
Job
everyone
done.
hates each other
Yeah.
behind the scenes. So
And also, I've been in organizations where nobody's got time to go to the thing you've
yeah.
put on. And there's nobody's released from their schedule. So you put on this lovely wellbeing event, whatever it might be, and probably with a really good intention, but nobody can go.
Yeah.
And that it's just kind of ironic, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Or
Like, people
switch
are
off. They're
exactly.
there physically, but mentally they're still at their desk thinking about what's
Exactly.
going on. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
those types of things. And really interesting point what you brought up then as well around those people that have maybe never experienced an unsafe workplace.
Mhm.
And I mean unsafe by someone's own individual measure of this isn't a place where I feel
Yeah.
happy and or I feel safe. Um, that they might not recognize that they're in a culture which actually is really good and doing good things. So
Mhm.
and we hear kind of stress chucked around quite a lot
Mm.
about people feeling stressed. And I think it's well, self-awareness needs to work both ways in that you need to understand what it's like to have the good things, but also understand where that level of daily pressure is and challenge, because ultimately that's again part of the role, isn't it? Is
Mm.
to experience challenge and pressure within your day.
Mhm.
So how can people kind of work out where those boundaries are themselves and just be able to check in with themselves around, okay, is this a healthy amount of pressure that I'm being put on with my role, or have we sort of stumbled into something else here?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's such an important point, because I think that self-management piece is so important. And I always start with the kind of idea that we're all different and everybody has a different capacity for stress. I go into different industries, and you have people who thrive off of high stress, people who go into first. So yeah, you go into industries where people really thrive off of high stress, and they perform best when there's a lot of pressure on them, and actually they don't perform so well when the pressure is taken off. On a Thursday afternoon when things are a bit quiet, that's when they are bored. They procrastinate, they don't enjoy it. So some people are really fulfilled by stress, and I always go back to stress in its own right is not a positive or a negative thing. It's not a problem until there's too much stress. Actually, a small amount of stress is really good for us. Stress represents motivation, purpose, duty, all the things that get us out of bed in the morning. If we have no stress, that's where people think they're aiming for.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just lie in a hammock all day. You wouldn't. You would
No.
you would feel this lack of purpose very quickly. We need to feel driven, needed. Like we know who we are. So small amounts of pressure and stress are really, really healthy because they motivate
Yeah.
us. So everybody's got to kind of work out, what's their kind of relaxed zone. If you imagine it almost like a graph,
Okay.
then kind of what is their comfortable zone? Like, I feel motivated, but I've got the resources to meet this challenge. I can do this. I feel good about it. Then there's kind of a stretch zone, and some people are very comfortable to be in that zone a lot of the time. Some people want to dip in, come back out,
Yeah.
But what's important is that we aren't there all the time, because we do all need that time down, to recharge, relax, and come back. Um, But it's massively personal whether you do enjoy that or you don't enjoy that.
Yeah.
And I've worked in industries as a consultant, giving a stress workshop where we try and work out where on that graph are you most comfortable. And some people's idea of stretch is so different to somebody else. Some people like to be very, close to the sun on this, and but that's fine because that's your personal kind of stress appetite or capacity. What you've got to work out is when that is too much for you, when that becomes unhealthy, when that becomes physically affecting you, when you can't sleep, when your heart is racing all the time, when you're getting anxious thoughts, that's when we're seeing that stress has been there too long. And nobody can sit in the high stress kind of zone for too long, because it does have huge mental and physical risks. We need to be careful. Stress is a huge risk physically as well. So I think it's about, in your job, making sure that it's a good fit for you in terms of the stress that is going to be part of that job, whether it feels like a healthy, safe challenge for you. If you feel that you never can do your job in the time you've been given, you never can fulfill things, then perhaps there's a resourcing problem there. Like sometimes jobs are just too big, there's too much. And we sometimes encourage companies to start like stress risk assessing jobs and work out, when you're designing a job, can this be done in the time you're allocating, or will it never be done?
Yeah.
Will that person be absolutely burnt out trying to get the bare minimum done? In which case we want to look at that, right? Because that's never going to feel good, is it? If you can never even feel like you're making much ground. So I think for me, it's always about making sure that if there are periods of intense stress and stretch, which we all have, that we're not going to be there too long, and that we know we've got breaks coming up. But I think, like you said, that self-awareness piece is about that this is a two-way relationship. When you take a job, when you interview, you should be asking those questions, checking that this is a good fit for you. And when you start doing the job, is it just that job doesn't suit you, the industry doesn't suit you, you'd rather do something else? In which case, I implore people to take that ownership. It's your life. Go and do something else. Go and try something else. Have conversations with friends. Work out, actually, I feel like that style of job would suit me way better, or I really don't like client facing and I thought I would, or whatever it might be, and it's fine to make that change. Look after yourself. Ultimately it's your health, it's your life, and you can't blame an industry for saying, this isn't right for me.
Yeah.
That, you can go. But, I think at the same time, it's also on the employer and on the managers, to be looking at that and making sure that people in your, in your remit, in your team, that they've got rest breaks, they've got time to recharge. There are strong boundaries there. You're enabling that, so that it's that two-way relationship.
Yeah, that was such a good summary, and exactly, just explained it so well. And I think that will be really helpful to people, because it's. I think when faced with the well-being kind of arena, people go, "Oh, well, my business is really deadline heavy, or I work in an environment that is quite high pressured in terms of physical safety, or and so I can't do any of that stuff." And it's actually, no, it's okay to say this actually is a high pressured environment, or there's lots of deadlines here. We have HMRC throwing deadlines at us on the daily. So there is
which
a lot.
Would stress me out. No end.
So we know what that is like, but then we've done things the other way. So, for example, we do 4-day week, because that allows people to be working at a more pressured rate, but for less of the time. So again, finding that balance. So I think that was such a good summary, and I can't wait to tell the team, and people to listen back to that.
But I think that's such an important point as well, though, is being honest as an employer and as an industry and as a manager, being honest about the stresses of the job. We don't have to dress it up. It's much better to be honest from the get-go and get those strategies in place, And I always say as well about forward planning, we sometimes dress it up with a nice word and we call it proactive coping. But when we talk about forward planning for our kind of stress and our well-being, we literally say to people as well about the power of getting in those breaks, knowing when your stretch and strain is. So if you can look ahead at the year, for example, if you're a teacher and you know that in September when you start term, that there is that groundswell of activity, and you know that at this time of the year there's exams or whatever it might be, if you can kind of understand the contours of your year, that's a really tough time for me, I know I get really stressed in that month, or I always feel so exhausted then. If you've got the power to book annual leave, and that's within your, obviously teachers are not the best example there, but if you've got those things coming up, putting in those rest breaks, saying I know at that point I really need that then, or I'll have that really crunch time because we've got to get all the annual accounts in, or whatever it is for you guys, so then I need that break. actually, we liken it to if I, went on a 4-hour car journey, but I didn't tell you when we're going to stop for, a service station and toilet and a coffee break. You're then in that kind of suspended state of when am I going to get a break? And that adds to your stress because you don't know what's coming.
Yeah.
If you can kind of almost kind of budget your stress, financial term,
there
we
we
go.
You've got it in there somewhere.
But if you can do that, if you can think, that's a really stretched time for me, but I'm going to give it my all, and then I know I'm going to have time to recharge and relax then, or I'm going to amp up, my self-care a little bit there and drop this off the agenda because I know at that time I can't do everything. If you can do that, that can really help as well. And that's that ownership piece of, I'm in control here, I'm in the driver's seat. Let me, plan that. That can really help as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And such great tools and those kind of examples that you give, like around the journey and stuff. Yeah, it makes complete sense when you can put it into that
Everyone
context.
wants to know when they're going to a service station.
Yeah. And being able to say no. And I feel like that's a whole other podcast probably on its own. So as we go into the festive season, the John Lewis adverts and things are fast approaching.
Yes.
How should people be thinking a little bit more about their well-being? It's obviously there's a lot that happens this time of year with the weather, with
the light,
finances, the light. There's a lot of pressure to spend time with people, to be really social, and fit it all in. So festive well-being, tell me a little bit about why it's not more important this time of year, but why there is should be a focus.
No, it is super important. I think there's two things. So there's the winter and there's the festive period, and both of them present quite unique challenges and quite intense challenges, So on the winter side, like you said, the light gets a lot less in the day. We see that kind of sunlight or daylight period really shrink. We see issues with the weather, that really does affect us. It affects our brains. It affects how we function. We're basically houseplants, aren't we? Like we need sunlight and nutrition and a bit of water. So I think you've got that side of it, which affects a lot of people. And we can go into kind of the condition end of it, but I think actually it affects everybody just in terms of general mood, motivation, getting out of bed in the morning, going, when it gets dark at 4 or 5 p.m. So we see that have a big impact. We also then see the pressures of the holiday season, whether it's Christmas that you celebrate or something else, or whether you don't celebrate, but it's all going on around you. In the UK, it's quite hard to tune out from it.
Yeah.
And like you said, we have this kind of influx of glossy adverts, everything's sparkly and wonderful, and then you've got social media and everybody is having a winter wonderland day out and everything looks so perfect. And I think the amount of comparison spikes, then like you said, huge amounts of financial pressure, especially if you've got children and you feel like you've got to spoil them and you've got to do all this stuff. And I think it has gone very, very kind of hyper, hasn't it, in the consumerism sense.
Yeah, it starts in Halloween, like pumpkin patches and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
It used to be kind of just December, and it was kind of that was it. It was confined to December, but now we're the minute the kids go back to school really in September, everyone's like, right, autumn, and it's pumpkin patches and it's Halloween,
bonfire night, and then it just rolls on. It's like a roll call of how are you performing? What do these things look
what
like?
Interesting things are you being part of? And it's exhausting, even if you're not doing it, just watching
it
is exhausting.
Scrolling, I'm exhausted seeing you all do these things. But I think there's such a lot of pressure, and then I think around the holiday season as well, it really highlights bereavement, grief, missing loved ones. For my family, it's a really tough time of year. And I think it is for a lot of families because you see who's missing from the table. You remember fond memories, or maybe you remember not fond memories. It's a time where a lot comes up for people, and like you said, there's that kind of pressure to see people, to be with family, and it might not be something that you find very positive for you. It might be really stressful. So I think it's partly just about that, acknowledging that it's not all perfect. It's not all glossy. Everybody is sharing with you this kind of curated highlight reel. It's not the reality. Nobody is living the John Lewis advert or the, whatever advert. Other stores are available. Yeah. But nobody is living that. And I think it's about, when it comes to winter well-being, we have to return to kind of understanding the seasons a little bit and thinking about, essentially, if we were animals, we might be hibernating. Like, this is that time of year that makes us kind of want that nurturing, want to feel cocooned, want to feel safe, want to feel cozy, and to kind of embrace that, and to not fight back against that, but actually embrace that a little bit, and think about kind of, are you nurturing yourself? Are you giving yourself time to rest? Are you doing it intentionally, enjoying it, trying to embrace it and say, like, oh, I'm going to have a cozy evening, or I'm going to do this for myself. But also trying to balance that with a little bit of discipline. Getting out when the daylight is there is so important. If you can get out for a morning walk in the winter, no matter what the weather, that daylight exposure is so important. It actually really helps our brains to understand that it's day. It sets our circadian rhythm properly. It's important for sleep. And you can not feel very motivated because you look out the window and it's all a bit soggy and grey. You think it's not quite the picturesque winter walk I was, imagining. But it is really important if you can get out. That really, really helps. And having that little bit of discipline around that is important in the winter. And thinking about it in terms of, it's for your mental health. It's not necessarily for your physical health. That's an added bonus. But your mental health, that's really, really important. And then even just making sure that, you've got good light exposure and things like that, that you're supplementing with vitamin D. They're really kind of basic tools that we have, but they're really important because they just help us keep well, in a time when the nature is not helping us
working
as
against
much.
us in a way. Yeah.
And we've got to kind of work with it, but establish those habits that are good for us, and keep us well.
So leaning into those kind
Mm.
of indulging in a little bit of downtime over the winter
Yes.
period when it is too rainy to go outside, then just, don't worry too
Yeah,
much.
definitely. And I think just allowing rest, like rest is a really powerful tool. And often in the winter, we feel like we need more rest. And I think seeing that as something that is a really healthy thing, it's a really good thing. It's not lazy or slobby, it's important. It's what we kind of like yearn for because that's what our bodies need. So if you can embrace it as a time for rest. And I think as well, going back to the point around kind of festive season and the comparison, making sure that you've got time in your diary, whatever you've got going on around Christmas, but making time for rest, making time for the things that you enjoy. And especially if you're somebody who finds it all very overstimulating, like that time to just decompress and be away from the world is super important because it's a protective measure, to keep yourself well. Some people thrive off of all of the connection and, all of the events and the sparkliness and everything. But it's also a time where quite a lot of people feel very lonely. It can highlight loneliness. A lot of people feel very isolated, and I think there's also this view of, oh, everyone's out doing all of this stuff. And they're not, most of us are at home watching something on the TV, and there's nothing wrong with that, So I think it's about just getting those habits in, thinking, what keeps me well in the winter, what works for me.
Yeah.
It's not the same for everybody. Some people will do completely different things and that will be great for them. And kind of not allowing that pressure and just saying, actually, no, I'm going to do what's good for me. And really going back to basics, daylight, sleep, good food that makes you feel nurtured, that's important.
So employers and workplaces being able to help over the festive period. So easy win that I can think of, lunchtime walks, getting out and walking while there's
Yes.
daylight, because
Yeah.
you hear it, don't you? Drive to work in the dark. I drove
Exactly.
home from work in the
Mm.
dark. So actually all of your daylight hours are potentially inside an artificially lit
Yeah,
office room. So
absolutely.
getting out on lunch breaks,
Yeah.
making sure that people have adequate time to go and make a cup of tea, have a sort of yak with a coworker, those sorts of things. But what other things could employers do as we go into this sort of festive period?
Yeah, I think they're great examples. I think, getting out for a walk and making that something that you do, and there is always this kind of feeling, isn't there, of like, oh, the weather's horrible, we'll just I'll just eat my lunch at my desk. Like, no, let's get up, let's move, let's get away, let's get that daylight, like you said, while you've got it, absolutely making the most of that. I think also just highlighting over the festive period, sources of support. I always think particularly around kind of the older generation as well. If you're concerned about people who are lonely, who are isolated, there's a lot of worry that comes up in the winter time and in the festive period, and there's lots that people can do. So I think signposting to support organizations and options as well, kind of highlighting, it's not all sparkles and happiness at Christmas. It's a really tough time. And sharing those resources, I think signposting is so important because when we signpost to organizations, we're also giving permission. We're also saying this is okay. Other people are experiencing this too. That in itself can be so powerful if you're not hearing that anywhere else. And then I also think as well, encouraging giving back. If people have got the, ability to do that, whether that is, donations, or whether it's donating food, or whether it's giving a bit of time, we kind of forget that part of the holiday season, I think, is because we're so focused on giving presents, right? And buying presents. But giving back, when we give back, it's so powerful for us as well. And it's a way to feel connected to something a little bit more meaningful, like around the festive period. If you can just join in with something, something local, it's a really powerful way to feel that sense of, you've done something good. And it's not an entirely altruistic thing, because it's also really good for you. It's really good for your well-being. It gives you a boost. We can sometimes call it like the doing good boost, and it does, but it's important. And I think if we can return back to that a little bit as well, that can be really lovely, because if you can feel like, actually, as an organization, you've chosen to do this, and you're going to, I don't know, drop this off to this care home, or you're going to support this local fundraiser, or you're going to, whatever it is, it can be something so small, everyone bringing a few cans for the food bank and just thinking about other people. I think that really helps shift that focus away from like a lot of pressure on you and your situation, and how is that looking, and is it perfect? Actually, let's remember to help other people and connect, and connection is massive. It comes into everything in well-being.
It does. And when you think back to, be it Christmases or other sort of festive celebrations, or just good memories, they're always about the people you were with, not about where you were, or what presents were involved, or what food you were eating. They're about the people you were with, and those memories. So I think that's important to remember also, isn't it? Is that
definitely you can't buy a good time, like no matter what you buy. And it's not about that, although we can kind of, it's nice to have things, and we can kind of be tricked into thinking, if we just buy that, or if we just had that food, or had those presents, or we're in that setting. But that's not, like you said, that's not actually what's at the heart of it. If you feel connected, if you feel a really good sense of community. And I think as well, it's sometimes I talk to people who, they don't have good family relationships, so they kind of dread Christmas, because traditionally we would all spend Christmas with our families. But it's also having that empowerment to do it your way. Like, if you would rather spend that time with a friendship group, rather than your family, or a community group that really lift you up, or actually that thing that you did on your own was the really lovely thing for you, carving out that time, and being able to say, actually, that's what fulfills me, or that's what makes me feel really good. That's really important as well. It's not all, it doesn't look the same for everybody.
No. And before we know it, we're back in January, new year, new goals, and the
cycle starts again. Don't even get me started on new year, new me.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not a fan of that at all. Goodness me.
No. So it's just take the moment. Nature is giving us some downtime.
Yes, exactly.
It's trying to tell us to slow down. And I think sort of the key takeaway is accept that. And
exactly. Allow it. Don't fight against it, and kind of just lean into the things that help you stay well in that period, and what that is. And it can be something so simple, but it can be really, really useful for you. It doesn't have to be shiny and expensive. It can be a simple habit. And we often joke that kind of it's like the least glamorous habits that you do again and again that are most useful for your well-being. It's not the shiny, exciting transformation stuff. It's small and steady. If you take a small step for your well-being every day, that adds up, and it really does. But it's not as exciting as, let's do something big for one day and hope that it transforms us.
Oh, that's been amazing and so interesting. And we'll make sure that we're tagging all of the things that you're involved in, and especially Working Well Southwest, because we've worked with you.
Yes.
And just being able to ask questions and share ideas, and just get a bit of communication going around wellbeing, I think is definitely the first step. So thank you so much, Amber, for coming in to speak to us on today's episode of The F Word.